I want to delve deeper into this topic, especially since considerable time has passed since the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. To what extent have the two sides adhered to the ceasefire? When does the second phase begin? And the Israel attacks on some areas of Palestinian territory. We will discuss this further with Mr. Thomas Sorley, a political analyst from the United States. Mr. Sorley, good day, and thank you for joining us. I want to start by asking to what extent both sides have adhered to the first phase of the ceasefire.
That's a good question. There seemed to be a hitch initially with the first phase, and who is causing the hitch is really up to who you believe. And at the last minute, it seems like Hamas agreed in Egypt to let the hostages go that they had agreed to let go over the weekend. And now we're kind of in this state where we're going through the second phase of negotiations. Or not negotiations, but just the terms of the negotiations. Where it goes from here is still anybody's guess, because it's still very a tenuous situation.
Yes, Mr. Sorley. Since the ceasefire began, Israel has struck Gaza twice, citing threats and the presence of armed groups. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, specifically in the Jenin camp, Israel attacks continue. When will the fighting between the armed groups and Israel stop?
Well, the question is, when is it going to stop? And the answer is probably, I'm not sure if it's going to stop the way that we're talking about when it comes to the current agreement. And I say that because we have two actors here, which is the American administration, the new American administration, and the Israeli government and cabinet, which is very conservative. And they seem to be really focused on an ethnic cleansing of Gaza. So it seems like they might talk about a ceasefire, but ultimately I think what their aim is to ethnically cleanse Gaza.
Yes, Mr. Sorley. We will address Donald Trump's proposal to resolve the Gaza issue shortly. But before that, I want to ask what Arab leaders can do. A meeting is scheduled for February 27 to discuss the situation in Palestine. What solution do you expect the Arab leaders to propose?
What's the role of the Arab countries? Well, it seems right now that the UAE is the only country that seems amenable to the Donald Trump plan, the ethnic cleansing, the relocation of the Palestinians. And it appears that all the other countries are opposed to this plan. So I don't know what role they'll play other than resisting the relocation and ethnic cleansing of Gaza. How they do that, I don't know.
Now that we have discussed the first phase of the ceasefire, is it apparent that Israel is preparing to send a delegation to Cairo to discuss the next phase? Do you expect them to proceed with the phase 2 or the ceasefire? As we know, more than 73 Israeli prisoners of war remain to be handed over to Hamas.
Well, it could be announced and it could be applied. Again, we're talking about events in the future that are so up in the air. It's hard to predict. So I can imagine that the hostages will be released and that agreement will come to pass. My concern is, after all this, again, I'm concerned about what the long-term outcome of what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank right now, and what the goal of the American administration and the goal of the Israeli administration, which in my mind does not seem to be really set on having a peace process more than, like I've said repeatedly, an ethnic cleansing of Gaza.
Yes, Mr. Sorley. Let's now turn to Donald Trump's proposal to relocate the people of Gaza. Do you think Trump's proposed this as a solution to the problems? The conflict is not limited to Gaza. There's also fighting in the West Bank, where many Palestinians live, and there are numerous Hamas armed groups. Can this proposal address this issue?
Resolution in terms of is it going to be resolved the way that Donald Trump wants it, the administration wants it to be resolved? I certainly hope not. And I don't know, because if they try to push the Gazans out, the Palestinians out of Gaza, it will not go well, obviously. It'll be a disaster. Many, many, many people will die, and there will be blowback in the region. So I don't see how this plan of pushing Palestinians out of Gaza is a plan that is acceptable or even feasible. I will think it'd be problematic to even begin the logistics of trying to do something like that, let alone not talking about ethics or morality.
As an expert analyst, what is your opinion on the solution? Some countries suggest a two-state solution. If that happens, do you believe the issue will be resolved?
I don't know what the solution is. I wish I could answer that. If I could answer that question succinctly and clearly in terms of like, here's the outcome, I'd probably be working with the government now or something. I don't know. Obviously, there was a two-state solution that was agreed to in the Oslo Accord, and that's kind of a so to speak, a dead horse at this point. It's really not an issue. The outcome, if there's going to be a peaceful solution, will have to be that the Arab governments get behind the Palestinians for real and defend the Palestinians. Because let's not forget, there are encroachments with illegal settlements in not only the West Bank, but also now part of Lebanon and Syria. So my hunch is that the Israeli government is not really looking to settle this issue in the way that we would probably like to see it be settled in terms of the Palestinians being able to have a homeland and a state in Gaza and the West Bank. I just don't see the Israelis really aiming for that, especially if you consider the makeup of the Israeli conservative cabinet, and especially now that we have an American administration with Donald Trump at the helm.
Mr. Sorley, some Arab countries, specifically Saudi Arabia, are trying to normalize relations with Israel. However, with the Gaza war breaking out, the situation has worsened. Do you expect Arab countries, especially Saudi Arabia, to normalize relations with Israel if the war is stopped and the issue is resolved?
Well, I think the question becomes about the Abraham Accords. You have to wonder if those accords are really kind of dead in the water, as like the Oslo Accords. In terms of Saudi Arabia normalizing relations with Israel, it's a big hurdle at this point because of the Gaza war. So for Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel, I think Israel would have to go back to the recognition of a Palestinian state, the rights of the Palestinians. And unfortunately, I don't even think the question of the return of the Palestinians is on the table, and has not been for a long time. But for Saudi Arabia, I would imagine to make peace and recognize Israel and have diplomatic relations with Israel, the Israeli government would have to come to terms with some type of two-state solution where the Palestinians had their own free and independent state.
Mr. Solly, some Arab countries are now concerned about the relocation of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. What guarantees can Israel and the United States provide to prevent the relocation of Gazans from becoming a problem?
So if we're looking for a solution, if we are talking about the division of Gaza into different sections, north, south, corridor, whatever, if that is the case, if the Gaza Strip is divided, I don't think there is a solution. That isn't a solution. So if we are talking about a division, a carving up of Gaza into further parts, and ethnically cleansing one part and letting Gazans live in another, I don't know if that's a viable solution, or if it just encourages more what's called blowback, which is, anytime you try something like this, there's going to be a reaction, and people are going to fight back. And so there's going to probably be more violence if that type of situation, if that type of solution is forced upon the Palestinians.
Sometimes it's interpreted that Israel's intentions go beyond just Palestine and Gaza, and Netanyahu has often said that he plans to change the map of the Middle East. How realistic are these interpretations?
I think that depends on the Israeli you're speaking to. I think there is a segment of Israelis that would like security, and they're not looking for expansion. Unfortunately, what we have is a government that keeps being reelected under Netanyahu that is about expansion, especially the conservative wing of his cabinet. And as I mentioned previously, as all this has been going on, this war and this ethnic cleansing has been going on in Gaza, the settlement issue and the violence in the West Bank has skyrocketed. And now, since the fall of the Syrian government, we have settlers moving into Syria, all because they claim to have a biblical claim to the land. And this is a real problem. This is a real problem for the world, and not just the Middle East. So my answer is, I think there are a segment of Israelis that would like to live in security and not really be about expansion. But there obviously is a large segment of Israelis who are about expansion and their claim to a biblical homeland, as well as the changing of the modern Middle East map, yet once again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas Early, for being with us.
I appreciate your time. Thank you for inviting me on.